Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. And we are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hello and welcome, all you porcupines. This is your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the Free State Project, Eric Brakey, welcoming you to episode 55 of the Porcupine Report, coming to you almost every single Wednesday at 7 o'clock on all of your favorite Free State Project social media platforms and podcasting apps. And go ahead and like and subscribe and share and do all the things that help us reach your friends, family, and grow our audience. I really appreciate the loyal fan base that we've grown for this show over the last 55 episodes. Before I get into today's episode, I want to say a quick word from our sponsor for this episode, which is Independence Realty. Are you moving to the Free State? Then you may need a good realtor, like my friends at Independence Realty Group. Their 7 agents, all FSP participants, bring over 30 years of combined experience and hundreds of millions in sales. Backed by Coldwell Banker, the nation's largest brokerage, IRG's Jack Garber is a Ramsey-trusted real estate professional. Whether buying or selling, Jack's patience, expertise, and dedication shine through, and he even helped me find my house in the Free State. So contact IRG at 603-274-9010 for your New Hampshire home journey. And thank you to Independence Realty for sponsoring today's episode. All right. For today's episode, first, a few news items. Recently, if you've been on our email list or you follow us on social media, which you should really be doing both, be sure if you're not getting our emails, sign up at fsp.org. We do great emails. I write them myself. They're always fun and dynamic. It's not the same old boring stuff. But recently, we've announced many speakers coming on for the New Hampshire Liberty Forum coming up April 24th through the 27th. Some of those names include Sergeant Dan McKnight, the leader of the Defend the Guard movement nationwide, former Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, who played a huge role in fighting the federal war on cannabis, or fighting against it, Jeff Deist, former president of the Mises Institute, Bruce Fenton, Will Ruger, Lily Tang Williams, Matt McCaw of the Greater Idaho Movement, and even a Soho Forum debate between myself and Andrew Heaton, moderated by the great Gene Epstein. So that's coming up soon at April 24th through the 27th. Learn more and grab your tickets at nhlibertyforum.com. It's going to be here before we know it. And I also want to say a quick note of congratulations to Representative Michael Granger, recent guest on this show, on the passage of his bill through the New Hampshire House this past week to repeal vehicle inspection requirements by a surprisingly strong margin, according to the union leader. Now it goes to the Senate. So one little piece of tyranny that is in the process of being repealed off the backs of the people of New Hampshire, thanks to Free Staters working in the state legislature. Way to go, Representative Granger. And I also want to say to you, our audience, thank you for your patience. As you may have noticed, I missed a few episodes. But I hope you enjoyed the conversations that we broadcasted over the last 2 weeks, conversations that I had on the Way Forward podcast and with Matt Kibbe. All great conversations. I hope you enjoyed it, but we're back to our regular programming. Now, one of the reasons I missed recent episodes was I was away on the Tom Woods cruise, sailing the Caribbean and the Gulf of America with about 100 libertarians on the 5th largest cruise ship in the world. Along the way, I want to show you a few photos from our journey. We stopped in the free city of Prospera, Honduras, seeing their Bitcoin center and many other aspects of their emerging free society. That was a great stop. In Mexico, I got to tour Mayan ruins alongside the great Scott Horton, who we also announced is coming to speak at PorcFest this June, which you can learn more at porcfest.com. And on the final day, Tom Woods even held a pitch contest. If you're watching one of the video versions of this, you can see in the background Tom Woods with his hand covering his face. He's either laughing or very embarrassed for me. I'm not sure which. But he held a pitch contest. I noticed that someone was missing from the cruise, economist and past cruise host Bob Murphy. So during my pitch, I ripped open my shirt and let everyone know where they will see Bob Murphy this June 16th through the 22nd at the 22nd Annual Porcupine Freedom Festival. And I let them know they could get their tickets, and you can too at porkfest.com. Apparently, ripping your shirt off is a good pitch strategy because I won a free ticket for next year's Tom Woods cruise. So I will be going back in April 2026, and I'm sure I'll be recruiting more seafaring libertarians to come visit and maybe even move to the Free State. So we're back. It was a wonderful experience, one that I would strongly recommend to anyone else who has the opportunity. In fact, this recently, just a few days ago at our new movers party in Manchester, at the Quill, I had so many people coming up to me over and over again. People were asking me, how was the Tom Woods cruise? I guess they'd heard I was there. Maybe they get my emails. They're signed up for the email list like you should be. And all I could tell them was it was amazing. Not only, look, 5 years ago when I married my wife, I promised her we were going to do a cruise. It was in the middle of COVID. It was kind of hard to do it. It took me a while. I finally made good on my wedding promise, and I got to meet with a lot of great libertarians along the way. So it was a great experience. And now after returning to the States, I do want to welcome to this show, the Porcupine Report, the host of the cruise. He is an author. He is a podcaster. He's a historian. Most importantly, he's a patron of the Free State Project. He gets one of these little patron pins right here, and also a future Free Stater. His name is Tom Woods. Tom, welcome to the Porcupine Report.
Glad to be here, Eric. Thank you.
Well, it's a real pleasure. I mean it in all sincerity. The Tom Woods cruise was it was a highlight of my life. Thank you so much for putting it on. What was it like? I guess you'd done 5 years of the Contra cruise with Bob Murphy, and then it stopped for a while because of COVID, and you guys took a break. What prompted you to bring back the Tom Woods cruise?
Well, geez, the last one we did was in 2019, and this one's 2025. So 6 years have gone by. And I always wanted to do it because we always had so much fun on these things. But as you say, COVID happened, and then they started cruising again, but you had to have, proof of the jab and all that. We're not doing any of that. And I wasn't sure that the cruise industry had fully recovered. Like, would you get the same kind of experience? Would you get the same quality of experience? So I went on a cruise last year to kind of test it out. And I found that, okay, I can see there's a slight degradation in service compared to the old days. Like, they used to service your room twice in a day. Now it's only once. But then I realized, but you know what? I can live with that. That's how a lot of hotels are. So that's fine. But I had been wanting to do it, but thinking that maybe it would never be possible. Maybe they were going to keep these crazy rules in place permanently. I hoped that wouldn't be the case. I assumed that what would happen was that there'd be so many people who would have been willing to cruise, but just wouldn't under those conditions, that they would have to relent. And that's more or less what happened. So Bob and I have not had any kind of falling out or anything, but he's got a lot of things going on land. But I just wanted to do it. He gave me his blessing. So Tom Woods Cruise was born.
Well, it was a lot of fun. I certainly don't mean to imply that there's any falling out between you and Bob Murphy, but but it is. I know you both keep very busy, but I'm glad we got Bob coming to PorcFest. I know you've had past experiences at you've been to some of our Free State Project events in the past, PorcFest and Liberty Forum. That's been a couple of years. I remember, I think it was the New Hampshire Liberty Forum in 2013. I want to say. I think you were the keynote speaker. That was the first time I'd ever even heard of Bitcoin. It was kind of new and cutting edge. And Tom Woods wasn't the big household name he is today. I guess you kind of hit it really big during the COVID era being a dissident there. And you've recently announced that you are planning. You've got a long-term plan, but I remember you announced recently not that recently, maybe half a year ago now, 6 months ago now, that you are in fact planning to move to New Hampshire at some point in the future. Could you tell folks a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a bit in the future. It's about 7 years off, but But you think about it, 2018 was 7 years ago. It doesn't seem like impossibly long ago. As you get older, for some reason, the years seem like they go by a lot faster. But yeah, that's my plan, because by that point, my youngest daughter will be, like technically an adult, and I don't want to disrupt my kids' lives any more than they have been by previous moves. So we're going to stay put where we are for the time being. But the thing is, I've lived around the country. I've lived in various places, and I've visited every single one of the 50 states. And as much as I have enjoyed and appreciated all those places, I have never found anywhere that felt like home the way New England feels to me. And that it doesn't matter, regardless of the politics. It's the feeling of home you have has nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah.
And I still have a little bit of family up there, but it's mostly that I still have a lot of friends. When I come to town every now and then, I get together with a bunch of old high school friends, and they're all still living in town. And I think about the food that they have that's unique to New England, and the attractions. And I still have sympathy for the old teams that we rooted for. I've always felt a little bit like a fish out of water not living there. So I'd like to be there, but I grew up in Massachusetts, but I ain't giving those people a dime. I just can't, in terms of income taxes, I just can't do it. Yeah. I just refuse. Not to mention there's a surtax. If you're extra successful, then they come at you again. They should be punished for that. They should be punished for being that envious and savage and dumb and self-defeating as to implement a policy like that. So I want to be kind of just, maybe not just over the border, because I don't want to live in Seabrook, for instance, but I'd like to be not that far in, so that I can easily go visit my friends, but then not have to suffer the consequences, basically. So I have some towns in mind, but that is my plan, yes.
Well, folks are very excited up here that is part of your plan, even if it's 7 years out. So by 2032, we'll be having a welcome wagon for Tom Woods.
Thank you.
And Jenna. And but I guess more in the present. So I know I jumped away from the cruise pretty quickly to talk about some of our events, but let's hop back to the cruise because it was such a highlight. What were some of your favorite moments from the Tom Woods cruise that we put on, and if folks that you put on, and if folks were curious about next year, what are some things you might tell them if they want to start thinking about it?
Well, Eric Brakey will be there, as far as I know. Is that right?
Well, you're giving me a free ticket, so I think I'm definitely in.
that was the thing, and that was, you won that fair and square. This was not favoritism on my part. That I
you weren't even a judge.
I wasn't even a judge. That's right. That's right. And so Eric, I'll tell people the full story. We had 3 judges, and each pitch is judged on a scale of 0 to 10. So our friend Eric here got a 10, a 10, and a 9.5. Now that is going to be very, very hard, if not impossible to beat. However, the very last person to go on did a very impressive job. The first judge turned over his card, and it was a 10. And the second judge turned over his card, and it was a 10. So now everything was resting on Broadway actor Clifton Duncan. What was he going to say? And he turned over his card and revealed an 8. And so Eric Brakey remained the front runner and therefore the winner. So it was very exciting. It really was. Well, so I can't promise Clifton Duncan again, but I do want to, but I might be able to. I have to find out. I know he'd like to come back. For anybody who doesn't know that name, that's a shame. You should know that name because he's been involved in a really, really important project. So Clifton is a Broadway actor whom I saw on Broadway in 2018 twice with my family, never realizing that I would get to know him personally because, COVID mania would take over the world. He was more or less blacklisted from Broadway because he declined the shots. And that meant they ruined his career. I mean, it was what happened to him. I can't even begin to describe it. It was horrible. And this was, he had gone through elite programs. Everything was going his way. His career was on the rise. And then suddenly it all got taken away from him. it's so devastating. You can't even talk about it really. But I've gotten to know him. I've had him on the Tom Woods Show a number of times. He's currently at work on a one-man show on the life and ideas of Thomas Sowell. Well, I realized that when I saw him on Broadway, I saw him just in an ordinary play, a comedy that I like very much. So I didn't realize he also had a singing voice. I never saw him in a musical. So I found out he had a singing voice, and he hasn't been on the stage because they blacklisted him. So I said, well, how would you like to get on the stage, come on my cruise, and put on a concert for my attendees? So that's exactly what he did. And I'm telling you, it is a shame you weren't there, because that show, as Eric, you can attest, absolutely. And people thought, oh, he's probably pretty good. He's a Broadway singer. He knocked everybody's socks off. It was, people had the chills in that room.
Yeah. I mean,
his voice was so good.
I'll tell you, Tom, I mean, the official cruise, the Royal Caribbean put on some great productions. There was a production of Grease. There was this this almost like Monty Python-esque thing about Christopher Columbus's distant cousin called Columbus. They were very fine. People said they were, Broadway level productions. And I think, having seen a few Broadway shows, I would say that certainly, I think it lives up to that. They were very, very, very well executed. But the private concert that Clifton Duncan put on for just the exclusive attendees of the Tom Woods portion of the cruise blew all of that out of the water. And I had some friends who'd come with me. One of them a Free Stater, and they missed out. They weren't there for it. And I just told them, you missed like the best part of the whole cruise. I think they were taking a nap. So they were disappointed when they realized it. But
oh, gee, yeah. So I'm very hopeful, because he's indicated that he's interested in coming back. He has so many songs. He easily do a whole new, or songs that he'd love to sing for us. He could easily do a whole new show with no problem. But anyway, so that is at least a running possibility. I can't make any promises on the special guests yet, because the cruise is so far in the future. It's April 19th to 26th, 2026. But I will say that I am striving to make this guest list so irresistible that even, like the most resistant person would feel like you have to come. And I know people are inclined to say, oh, I don't like cruises. No, you don't like boring, dumb boomer cruises. But getting to hear a guy like this, who, like Clifton Duncan, for example, who was unjustly removed from the Broadway stage, but who has that talent and who deserves to be on that stage, more than anybody getting to hear him do an exclusive show, I think you can tolerate being on a cruise ship for that. Not to mention, you hang around with all good, decent people. You don't have to explain yourself around. That's fun. We go to fun, interesting places. We have great meals together, excellent dinner conversations. We stay up till the wee hours. Those of us who are night owls, we have a part of the ship where we just hang out, talk and whatever. But we also do things like the pitch competition. You were on my celebrity panel for Match Game, the old show from the 70s. And Match Game was absolutely hysterical. Everybody loved that. So we do fun stuff like that. But then we also hear serious material, like Scott Horton was there. And so he was talking to us, obviously, about Ukraine. We had Mikkel Thorup, the world traveler, talking about how to develop an international plan B. Jason Rink used to be known as the most canceled filmmaker in America, and he talked about his travails and what he's been up to. We heard from the great Eric Brakey. So it's just nonstop fun. It's fun. It's interesting, engaging. You meet friends that you're going to have the rest of your life, and you can't wait for the next one. So, yeah, you'd be nuts not to go. It's just such fun. I had our friend Stephan Kinsella was there. He's a libertarian theorist, an author, legal guy, intellectual property guy. And he actually wrote to say that this cruise was one of the best weeks of my life. So, I mean, I don't mean like you have a little bit of fun. I mean, like, it's awesome.
It was nice to meet Stephan Kinsella in person, because he can be a little, he has sharp elbows on the internet.
He's a little abrasive online. We'll put it that way.
But very, perfectly pleasant in person, and a lot of respect for the man. Do you know yet where the Tom Woods cruise is going next year?
Well, I know where it's leaving from. It'll be leaving from the port closest to my home, Port Canaveral in Florida. So you'd fly into Orlando and go from there. The issue is we just need to make absolutely certain. So the date is going to be April 19th, but there are several possible ships we could use. We want to make absolutely certain that we have the appropriate meeting space on the ship that we choose. And so we'll be choosing that in the next week or so. But so, it'll be another Caribbean cruise. My hope is that I have one particular ship in mind where we would stop at 4 places rather than 3. And they're destinations that I kind of like. I kind of like the U.S. Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands, and we would hit both of those. So if we get my way, it'll be a great itinerary. But I don't see how you can go wrong, honestly, with the itineraries that leave out of Port Canaveral.
Yeah. I mean, truth be told, some of the days at sea were some of the most fun too, just because there was so much. That's when, of course, the seminars and the Tom Woods content was. So
right. Yep.
Well, let's shift to something completely different, unless you have more to say about the cruise. Obviously, you are on your podcast, The Tom Woods Show. You're a great commentator on so many things, and you're interviewing a lot of very interesting people, oftentimes about kind of the shape of national politics, where things are going, and always with a particular perspective of, coming out of the Ron Paul liberty movement, how we might look at the state of the world today. What's your take on this moment that we're in, this second Trump era? And how might a libertarian look at this moment if we're not being totally black-pilled and just looking for we can always find the black pill lining of everything, why every supposed victory is not really a victory. But how do you view kind of the moment we're in right now?
Well, it's a moment with, as with so many moments, promise and peril. But there is a lot of promise because, we unfortunately are not the majority that we'd like to be. But there are a lot of Americans who maybe see the world 60% the way we do, which is better than the 10% a lot of them do. And I can work with that. If somebody is with me, maybe 60%, but doesn't really have a fully thought out philosophical system as to why, I can work with that. I can start with that and say, well, you've got this good instinct. Let's extend it to this case and this case and this case and this case, because there's no reason it should be confined only to this case. And that's the way I brought people along kind of over the years. I know Scott Horton says that it's an oversimplification of what he says, but he says you attack the right from the right and the left from the left. So that's easy. In America, that's easy because the so-called left has yielded on so many things. I mean, they're cheering for the military-industrial complex. They're cheering for Liz Cheney. You attack that from the left. You say Liz Cheney's a terrible warmonger who has rained down terror on helpless populations around the world, or has cheered that on. And sorry, if you're gonna be on the left, you just can't support that. That's how you go after them. And then likewise on the right, you say, oh, you favor private property and you don't like government employees, whatever. So don't make an exception for this, and this. That's the way I do it, and that actually does seem to work because it a lot of people who. Yeah, there are a lot of average Americans couldn't care less whether they're philosophically consistent or anything like that. But there are some people who want to be like hardcore, whatever they are. Whatever it is, they want to be the hardcore version. And if I show them up as being like the wimpy version, the wimpy establishment approved version of what they want to be, well, they don't want that, So that's what I do. But I mean, the very fact that anybody's even talking about people argue about Elon Musk. I hear people saying he just wants to put a chip in your head and you're all a bunch of dupes for following along. Okay, well, whatever. But he is saying, for instance, that, we should audit the Fed. Now, I don't know if that's ever going to happen. And, auditing the Fed is not that important to me because I'd rather I already know the things that it does that are awful. I already know, I don't even need that. So I just want to go after thinking about alternatives or how we would live without it. But the fact that that's being suddenly talked about when Ron Paul talked about it, it was like some weird, crankish, oddball thing that nobody could understand. And now suddenly the weird, crankish, oddball thing has a lot of support. And that's the thing, is that things that he used to say that he would be laughed at are now just commonplaces. I found a clip from one of the GOP presidential debates that he was in. And Chris Wallace maybe was reviewing a list of agencies that Dr. Paul had supported abolishing. And the purpose of this list was to show how backward and what a doddering old man he was, and unreasonable and unelectable and all that. So he listed all these agencies. If you did that today, there would be a decent number of people in the current GOP grassroots who would nod their heads at that. Whereas some of those very people, to their shame, 12, 16 years ago, were listening to that rundown and thinking, oh, what a crank. We can't have that. Well, some of these people have been de-Romnified, and that's a good thing. They've been de-McCainized. That's a good thing. Now, at the same time, I don't know they've entirely been tested yet. I mean, you let there be one apparent or real terrorist attack in the U.S., and then we'll see how much they really stick to the no foreign wars thing. Like that's when I'll know they're serious about it. But you see what I mean? In these conditions, I don't think we should be full of despair or constantly trying to figure out how every apparent victory is actually a secret loss. If you have like the secret decoder ring, you can figure out how actually this thing that looks good to you stupid, unsophisticated people, who, unlike all of you, can connect the dots. I know that it's a bad thing. I mean, knock that off already. I mean, I don't know how you survive living on a diet of that 24 hours a day.
It does seem to me like there's very much, and maybe this has always been kind of a historic divide in the libertarian movement of how we view and react to populism. And I think this has always been like the brilliance of kind of the Rothbardian strategy, is seeing populism as an opportunity, seeing a bunch of angry people angry at a lot of in generally the right direction, but maybe they need a little bit of an ideological framework to point them at the real kind of the real enemies who need to be taken down. These corrupt government agencies, the Federal Reserve, the military industrial complex, and so on, versus those who see populism and just think, ooh, this is going to get wild and out of control, and we need to have a much more measured way of bringing about libertarianism, but we never seem to get there.
That's just, I mean, the thing is, you can't have everything you want. I mean, ideally, I'd like everybody to go along with what we think, because they sat down and read 3 books and absorbed all the ideas, and they've drawn the appropriate conclusions. I mean, that would be ideal.
Yeah.
I wish that were the case. I wish the world was just one more human action length book away from understanding how the world works. Unfortunately, I think, if we've been alive long enough, we know that's not how people are. I wish we lived in that world. How I wish we did. And the thing is, half of what I do is aimed at that world that doesn't exist, that is brought around to the right views by persuasion alone. Because there are some people who are, but other people, it's not just it's persuasion, but also feeling like they belong to something. It's also that they have a gut instinct that somebody is kind of on their side and is sticking it to the people who are ripping them off. If that's what it takes to get somebody awakened, that's fine with me. Obviously, there's a concern with any kind of political approach, whether it's populism or not. With populism, the concern could be that the populist leader is so charismatic that he can talk the people into any kind of self-sabotaging, self-destructive behavior, and they'll cheer their own harm. And we don't want that. But as I say, the think tank approach of, well, we'll just keep issuing policy papers and we'll send them over to Orrin Hatch and Mitt Romney and John McCain and see if anything gets done, that obviously doesn't work. So at some point, you got to roll the dice and try something.
Now, of course, as we kind of talk about, there's so much focus on trying to shift things on the national level, in which we really do have to, form coalitions with with groups that aren't totally libertarian. People disagree which groups those should be. Should it be the MAGA folks? Should it be the neocons? Should it be progressives or what have you? We all fight in the liberty movement about that. But I'm curious kind of for your thoughts on the kind of the unique approach that the Free State Project has been taking the last 22 years, this idea of we're not going to persuade enough people to have a real shift. We're going to try to recruit people and concentrate in one place where we can build our own kind of community on libertarian principles the way we want to, rather than hoping that we'll educate people to across the country to have a great awakening and move towards liberty. What do you think of the kind of concentration strategy approach?
Well, I mean, it makes sense. It works. I think it works. I like Stalin wanted to create internal difficulties in like the Baltic states, so he flooded them with ethnic Russians, and he figured that will that will disrupt the way things are run. Well, what if you bring a bunch of libertarians somewhere? That will disrupt the way things are run, and maybe not in a way that's welcome to the people on the receiving end. But the thing is, the kind of disruption we bring is a disruption of stop using violence to get your way. Stop using the state to get your way. If the things that you want are really worthy, you can convince people to support them. But so I don't feel sorry for people who lived in New Hampshire and then suddenly a bunch of Free Staters show up. It serves them right for thinking they can get their way through coercion. So I don't worry about that. But it does work. And I do think that it's a good strategy for people, as you say, who are in the minority philosophically. If you're in the minority, you make the most of what you have. And it reminds me, I have a book, some of my books have great titles. Others don't. We'll just put it very gently. So I have a book called 33, oh gosh, I can't even say it. 33 Questions About American History You're Not Supposed to Ask. Terrible title. I don't know why nobody tried to talk me out of that.
I read it. It was pretty good.
It's the book. I love it. It's one of my favorite books that I wrote. But there's a chapter in there called Who Was S.B. Fuller? S.B. Fuller was a black businessman in the 20th century who came to the conclusion that given the state of things, it wouldn't always be the case that white America would give him a fair shake. But he decided that the correct approach to that was to realize that within the black community, he had a big built-in market already. So he said, well, what if we make things and sell them to each other, and then maybe someday we'll be welcomed into the wider society and we'll have an even bigger market. But the fact is we have a market right here.
Right.
We have each other right here. Why don't we at least start with that? And it's interesting, even Jesse Jackson was a friend of his and a supporter of what he was doing. And he would give away automobiles to winners of his sales contests. He was a very, very interesting guy. But it's a very similar idea that we're in a minority. And, in these cases, we're not a particularly admired minority. So we can either sit and deplore that situation, or we can do something about it by taking advantage of each other, like of the fact that we have each other. So that's what I think you guys are doing.
Well, and one of the things I, years back, I read your book Nullification, and this is before I had ever run for office and had ever imagined I'd be in a position to work directly on state policy. But it really became, in a lot of ways, one of my handbooks for like how to fight back against the federal government once I did get into office. But the challenge I always came up against was all these other state legislators who don't recognize the power that they actually have, that the state legislature has to enforce the terms of the Constitution against the federal government, to nullify unconstitutional federal laws. And it was frustrating being in the state Senate in Maine, being one person saying we can do this, and everyone else is saying, I don't know that, supremacy clause says that we can't, right? They've never really understood. They just have whatever their 8th grade history teacher told them the supremacy clause.
And by the way, I understand why somebody with a superficial knowledge of this would think the supremacy clause means you can't do that. I mean, I totally get it, but once it's been pointed out to you that that's not the correct understanding of the supremacy clause, we should be prepared now to move on.
Right.
But unfortunately, that doesn't happen.
Well, it was frustrating to not have a concentration of other of other legislators who were willing to be bold, but it's been amazing. Now I'm just on the outside looking in at the New Hampshire legislature now, and it's amazing to see. It feels like we are kind of hijacking one of those laboratories of democracy where we can start to put these ideas into practice and demonstrate that you can nullify the federal government, you can defend the guard, you can nullify their gun control schemes. And do you, as you look at kind of the progress of the liberty movement over the last, let's say, last decade and a half? I mean, I remember from the first time I met you, Tom, at CPAC 2011, and you signed my copy of Meltdown. To Eric, best wishes, Tom Wood, CPAC 2011. I remember there was a long line to get your book signed while Donald Rumsfeld, who had just gotten the Defender of the Constitution Award, nobody cared to get his book signed. But in the long arc since then, there have been so many efforts pushed at trying to get people elected into the federal level. We've had more failures than successes there. Some nice successes with Thomas Massey, Rand Paul, and others. But really, it seems like in the state legislatures around the country, particularly in New Hampshire, that's where you've seen people getting elected by the hundreds now, coming out of the Ron Paul movement into state legislatures. What do you see as kind of the prospects for, I guess, many of these ideas now that you've been talking about in the state legislatures around the country?
I never really know what the right answer to that question is. First of all, about where you should concentrate, because you can make a great case for both.
Yeah.
I mean, of course I get that on the local level, there's a lot of low hanging fruit that we're just leaving sitting there because everybody wants to be the U.S. senator.
Yeah.
And yet all these other things that involve so much of your day-to-day life, you're just leaving to be picked up by somebody who, spends $10K on a campaign like that. We shouldn't be letting that happen. That's for sure. But yeah, it's interesting because it's to think about this, because in the old days when I was talking about nullification, first it was George W. Bush, then it was Barack Obama. And when it was Barack Obama, well, the Tea Party people couldn't, read that book fast enough, nullification. Right. They were ready to get out there and defy the federal government in their states. But I think at this moment, and by the way, if it had been a Mitt Romney, I think 80% of them would have still been on board. Yeah. Because they would have understood Mitt Romney's a bum, and if Mitt Romney had been elected, we would still need to resist his crazy measures at the state level. But I think the Trump thing, it's not just the Trump thing, it's also the transformation of the Democrats over the past 30 years. The Democrats in the 1990s, they had their problems, and I don't pine for them. But you didn't get as much of a sense that they were absolutely at war with you at every turn. And now you do get that feeling with them. And combine that with this polarizing figure of Trump, and a lot of people have thought, well, warts and all, this is the guy. This is the guy for this moment, because he's independently wealthy. He doesn't care. He doesn't mind being boorish. He doesn't mind telling these people off. This might be the guy we need. Like, we don't need the genteel Mitt Romney anymore. If we ever did, we need this guy. And so I think now what's happening is there's so much support coalescing around Trump and his efforts at the federal level that I think people are taking some of these issues of state resistance to the federal government and putting them to the side. Like, I want to be on Trump's team. I don't want to be viewed as somebody who's resisting the federal government on something. So I think for that reason, I would be inclined to think that these efforts are not as hot at the moment, particularly because even though you could easily imagine, in principle, the left supporting state level measures, on behalf of all kinds of various causes. For some reason, this isn't how their brains work most of the time. It's either federal or nothing.
Yeah.
They can't think about a state level solution, or, they've all imbibed their version of the supremacy clause. So they just can't think this way. So they're out of the picture. And the right-wing people seem, at least to me, to have kind of abandoned the field. So I think I think it might be a bit of a struggle. I might want to check in with Michael Bolden of the 10th Amendment Center and see if my instincts are right about that.
Yeah, certainly whenever you have your guy in the federal level.
But it's more than your guy,
Yeah.
like, because Mitt Romney was kind of like their guy.
Yeah.
But I think they would have resisted him. Or John McCain. I think they would have, because they would have thought, at best, they would have thought, well, McCain's doing his best, but he can't know everything that's going on.
Yeah.
But with Trump, I think it's different. He's more than just their guy. He's from my particular political party. I think that his followers view him as being somebody who he doesn't just have a job, like he got elected to a job. I think they think of him as somebody who actually cares about them. That's how they think of him. Yeah. And that he doesn't need this. He's rich and he could retire and spend time with his grandkids. He doesn't need any of this, being called a Russian spy or being shot at or whatever. And so I think they view him as way more than just, well, it's our guy, so we better do what he says. I think they feel like in American politics, we've never had a guy like this. They think of him as a unique case.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose it's interesting. I wonder if there are arguments you could form for directing the angst for why we need to nullify more at the knuckle draggers in Congress than at the executive.
Yeah, absolutely. You could. It would be worth a shot.
If they're saying Trump can't cut all this federal spending, then we'll just nullify it so that to reinforce Trump or something like that.
Well, there was some talk, wasn't there? In maybe you would know about this, Eric, in Maine, where I had this crazy idea in my book in Nullification. Crazy idea that the states might consider withholding the federal income tax payments if they have constitutional objections to what the federal government is up to. Well, guess what we just heard out of Maine? That if the federal government deprives us of our federal funding, we're going to withhold the tax payments and we're going to provide that funding ourselves. Now, whoa, it took a Donald Trump to get blue state governors to think creatively for once in their lives.
Well, it's interesting. Now, I saw that circulating around, and I'm not sure if that's actually an authentic quote from Governor Janet Mills or someone.
Is it? Wouldn't that be? I should have known.
But when I saw it, I thought, wow, because just 2 years ago, Tom, inspired by that little clause in nullification, I think it was almost like a footnote on tax nullification. I sponsored that very bill for tax nullification in Maine. And brought it to the taxation committee. They didn't know what to do with it. It got shelved. The Janet Mills administration came out and testified against it and how it was unconstitutional and all that. And when I saw that, I just thought, did they just like lift this bill that they had because anyway. But I will actually be presenting on that very, very topic at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. So it's funny that you bring it up. But it is nice whenever you do have the shift on the federal level that you get, maybe to some degree, Democrats who start to think about these ideas. I will tell you, in Maine on Defend the Guard, I went to testify on the bill there, just as I did in New Hampshire. And I saw the Democrat House committee chair who'd voted against Defend the Guard 2 years ago, suddenly now is thinking about it in the context of Donald Trump. And he had just announced that he wanted to go into Gaza. And now suddenly she's thinking like, wait, if voting for this would mean I would be saying that Donald Trump cannot take our National Guardsmen and put them into Gaza and move all the people off the land. So suddenly it's like you see some of these light bulbs going off just because it's not their guy, their guy there. So, and it doesn't seem that momentum for Defend the Guard has slowed down with Republicans. I mean, when I see that it passed the Virginia House of Delegates, and you see a lot of the states that have passed, or the bodies that have passed it before are passing it again, I wonder maybe if somehow Defend the Guard has built up enough momentum that it's not falling prey to the same slowdowns that we might see among Republicans in other areas of nullification.
Well, I think there is some support among federal officials now for defend the guard. So it's not as radioactive as it once was.
Yeah, I mean, you have the Secretary of Defense. I guess he hasn't said anything since he became Secretary of Defense, so we'll see if he still supports it. But he was on record supporting Defend the Guard when he was a Fox News commentator. So we'll see how that holds up. But now that all the career military folks are surrounding him, we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, I remember, and we'll be hitting the 50-minute mark soon, so we'll wrap up shortly. But you came out to the Porcupine Freedom Festival during the height of COVID, when it was one of the only festivals going on in the country. Everyone else had to shut down because the venues or stuff weren't cooperating, even when Liberty folks wanted to persist. What are some of your, I guess, memories from PorcFest that year, or past Free State Project events that you've been out to?
Well, I'll say I went to my first PorcFest in 2020 simply because I wanted to support it in that year when so few things were happening. I was so impressed by the guts it took to just hold it anyway that I thought I really should be there. So that was the thing. I had been asked to go to PorcFest for years and years and years, and I had never done it. But I thought I have to do it for this precise reason, because it's important that they're holding it, period. And then I went the following year too. So I've been twice. And I'll just say I had the only thing that's wrong with PorcFest is, and maybe it's been fixed since then, but not enough late night food options. Okay. Now, some of you are going to PorcFest and going to bed at 10 p.m. and waking up at 5. That's not why I go out of town. Okay. I go out of town to relax, and relaxing does not mean waking up when farmers do for me. So I want to sleep. But I also want to stay up late, because staying up late is fun, because then I get to hang out with my friends, and there should be more food when I'm doing that. There's some food, there should be more food. That is a gap in the market for sure. But what was neat about it was there was actually a lot of food. There were a lot of interesting people. A lot of people I had met, hadn't seen in years and years. They all converge on PorcFest. Everybody there was a well-wisher. I mean, everybody was a well-wisher. I couldn't walk 10 feet without having a kind word said. It was just the atmosphere was wonderful. The speakers were great. I got to see Bob Murphy, which, as you promised this coming year, well, I got to see him myself at PorcFest when I couldn't see him on board our cruise because we had to cancel it. So I would just sit there and just talk all night, and it was just a ton of fun, and people with all different hobbies and interests, and all different breakout sessions and workshops. And one year there was even a film festival, and I attended some of that. So that was really wonderful. And I have been at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. That was a long time ago. I think I co-headlined that with Jack Spirko of the Survival podcast. And I had a wonderful time. And I was so swept up in that moment that because people were starting to, I don't know what it was about that evening, but there were people in the room who were saying, you know what, I'm going to donate $1,000 to the Free State Project. Why not? Back when $1,000, really meant something. And there would be cheers. And then I think Jack might have said that he was going to give $1,000, and there were cheers. And so I get up in the middle of my talk. I said, you know what? I'm going to throw in $1,000 of my own. It was just wild. It was like wildfire. It was like people felt something happening in that room. Like we were involved in a really important project, and I didn't want to be left out. I want to be part of that thing. So again, the kind of person who attends is just top notch. You're not going to be bored with the dinner conversation. You're going to get to meet really interesting people, hear really interesting people. And these are action-oriented people. The very fact that you're in this Free State Project means you've done something. You haven't just written angry letters to the editor. You actually uprooted yourself and moved to a whole new place because of the way you want to live and because of what you believe. That's an action taker. And I like being around action takers. There's so few of them in the world. People who talk, or all they do is theoretical, but they don't take action. And everybody in one of those rooms, whether it's the New Hampshire Liberty Forum or the campground for Pork Fest, they're all action takers. And that is a welcome relief. There is a place for the occasional policy report and this and that, but I'll take an action taker over that any day.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for the kind words. And it's really, I know folks think very fondly of you here in the Free State. People are very excited that come 2032, we'll get to throw a welcome wagon for you. And I hope that sometime between now and then we'll get to welcome you back to Liberty Forum or Pork Fest. I know you keep very busy. You're in high demand with all these events going on around the country. But we are glad at Pork Fest this year. You mentioned the food. This year, we're really focusing on food. Our theme is Taste the Revolution. We're having Joel Salatin is joining us, as well as many others. So I'll make sure to mention to many of the, I think ideally we're going to have even more food vendors than usual. Late night options, there's a great untapped market. We'll make sure that there's some, I appreciate the feedback there. And Tom, I hope we get more Free Staters on the Tom Woods Cruise next year. It was a blast having a small handful there this year. And thank you for putting it all together.
Well, thank you. I do have a page where people who think they might be interested in going can be the first to find out about it. So it's tomwoods.com/cruise, not tomwoodscruise.com. It's tomwoods.com/cruise. That's a place you can enter your email address, and I'll let you know when we're ready to go with the announcement, and when you can hop on board, because the first 50 people to sign up always get some special benefit. So you want to be one of those. And
this year was a tour of Prospera, which was a real treat.
Yeah, the free, one of the free private cities on Honduras, and it was the hospitality they showed us was great. What they're building there is amazing, and I figured everybody else at that particular cruise port was going to be snorkeling or whatever. Nothing wrong with snorkeling. That's great. Scott Horton went snorkeling that day with his daughter, had a great time. But I figured we can go snorkeling at the next stop. At this stop, we're going to have an unsanctioned excursion, because it was not an official cruise line excursion. I lined it up, and I figured if we're there, why would we not go visit the city? And one last thing I'll say, Eric, is that my wife pointed this out to me. I realized that how funny it was that I built up such trust among people on that cruise that a whole bunch of us went down a random alley in Honduras where there were 5 unmarked shuttle vans, and they just got in them because I told them to. I mean, that's some trust right there that you built up with the folks.
Well, thank you for not harvesting our organs, Tom. We really...
It all worked out. Here you are back in one piece and with a free cruise to boot.
Yeah. No, it was a lot of fun. I look forward to next year, and thank you so much for all you do, Tom, and thanks for being on the show today. Is there anything else you'd like to promote before we go?
Well, maybe tomwoods.com. Look around there, because I'm doing a lot more stuff now than I was when you first heard of me 15 years ago or whenever.
Yeah. All right, Tom. Thank you so much, and I'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks a lot, Eric.
All right, everyone, that's the show. Thank you to Tom Woods for joining us. I highly recommend all of his books. You can go find them. You can check out his website as well. Again, I do want to promote the New Hampshire Liberty Forum is coming up soon. I told you some of the speakers that we've announced for that. Then Pork Fest, as we've talked about, is going to be right around the corner in mid-June 16th through the 22nd. As I mentioned, Joel Salatin is joining us. Scott Horton is joining us. Connor Boyack, the author of the Tuttle Twins. We announced Corey DeAngelis, who is a big advocate for school choice on the national level. He will be joining us, as well as many other great speakers that we recently announced. I think just today we announced that Jack Hunter is returning to Pork Fest, Hannah Cox, so many others. So I really hope that you join us for both the New Hampshire Liberty Forum and for Pork Fest. NHLibertyForum.com, PorkFest.com, pork with a C, not a K. Usually I say, you can remember pork with a C, not a K, because it's not a barbecue festival. It's a Porcupine Freedom Festival. But this year we are celebrating food freedom, so maybe there will be some nice barbecue this year. Either way, I hope that you join us. Would love to see you there. Go to the websites, find out more, grab your tickets. And furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.